I would like to welcome each one of you who have joined in for this webinar. And we are so glad that you are able to make your time for this evening. We understand there are a lot of different uh, Zoom meetings and webinars taking place, and it is definitely an intentional effort on your part to be part of this meeting. So we are so thankful to you. I'm Raj Mandal, and I'm a member of the Tracy community. And Tracy, for those of you who are not familiar, uh, is a society that was established sometime in the early 70s. And it was established with the vision of how the biblical word, the biblical truth can be communicated with regards to the contemporary concerns of our society. So have a relationship between the word and the world, and how the issues of the world can be looked into from a biblical perspective and reflection. So for so many years with various leaders who have been part of this Tracy community, Tracy has been engaged in through writings, through seminars, through workshops. And one of the activity that this is taking place is part of a reflection group that has been happening in Delhi for quite some years. And we are able to have it first time over the web this evening. So we would like to thank each one of you. And for today's uh, evening session, we have a conversation, a dialogue with Cherian Thomas. Many of you are already familiar with Cherian, but those of you who are perhaps not so familiar, I would like to introduce him. Cherian Thomas is also a member of the Tracy community. So that is, we are so glad that he has been a member since his tenure when he was in Delhi with his family. He is currently serving as the regional leader for World Vision International, South Asia Pacific region. But Cherian brings in a multidisciplinary background of education as well as work experience. So though he is a mechanical engineer by training, but he also has degrees in finance, and he worked in the banking sector. He worked in the corporate sector of infrastructure development with IDFC. And in that, he was engaged much in public-private partnership initiatives. But also he has been involved in the community development and sustainability efforts, and through project finance and various other measures that he has been involved with different companies and organizations that he has been part of. Previous to this current position, he served as the CEO of World Vision India, and also prior to that, the IDFC Foundation. So Cherian and his wife Jamila, they are based currently in Bangalore, and they have two young daughters, Divya and Sanjana. So we are glad to have you, Cherian, today for this evening. And Cherian has been one of the part of the initial group which started this Delhi Reflection series while they were in Delhi. So we are so glad that you are here to share with us today. So I won't take much time. Just to brief you, we would, because we have just 1 hour session, so we would like it to make it as much engaging as possible. So what we will do is, when as Cherian shares, and you have already perhaps gone through the paper that was shared with you. So if you have questions to ask, you can write your questions on the chat box. But also we will have, after he is finished his sharing, we will have a time for open question and answer session. At that time also you will have the opportunity to pose your questions, that you can unmute yourself and pose your question. So both ways, you can either write your questions in the chat box, or at the time of question and answer session, you can ask the question directly. So this is the way it is formatted. And just to introduce to this topic, as during this COVID 3 months of lockdown, I think one of the Christian circles we see, or churches, there is quite a spurt of activity, and somehow it appears that we are more busy in this kind of online platforms uh, than we were prior to this. And a lot of discussions is taking place, and how COVID is going to affect not only us, but the whole global community, and what it means to all these implications. And there are also many views as to how, whether this COVID is part of the end time signs, whether it is a judgment of God, or whether it is a result of our irresponsible living as consumerist society. So a lot of different speculations and assumptions are there. So I would like to now invite Cherian to share, as part of his whole engagement as a World Vision person. They have been engaged in responding to this crisis, and based upon that, the biblical reflection that he has brought into his paper, I would now like to welcome Cherian to share. And after that, as I mentioned, we would have time to interact with him. Yes, Cherian.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for this invitation to be part of this conversation this evening. Uh, and when I looked at some of the names, I could see that there were several giants uh, in the group. So I'm certainly aware of that. Uh, I don't have a specific presentation to make, but I circulated a paper in advance, and it would largely be the text of what I would be speaking about today. And as a development sector professional is how it was titled. And again, my own journey into the development sector has been, in some sense, quite. Uh, I would always think of it as a process of God in many ways preparing me for this journey. And when I look at my own working life, the formal work that I did with external organizations from the time I began, it kind of spanned industry. It moved into commercial banking, and then gradually moved into the area of development more and more, because I was convinced that God has purposes for us well beyond our own personal aspirations. And so through a series of choices that I made, I've kind of reached this. And so while I have formal qualifications in engineering, as uh, Raj did mention earlier, and also worked in the area of finance, I find that these are qualifications which help me sometimes do my work even now, in some ways in more effective manner. And that's something that I'm very grateful to God for. But nevertheless, all that I see when I look back in the last almost 3.5 decades is how God has led me in this whole journey. And I now see myself more basically, and as a development sector professional. So I don't claim to be a theological expert or a Bible scholar, as many of you are, but my reflections are based on the experience and insights that come sometimes from years of having served, and also being a student of scripture over this time, or right from the time I was in university with the UESI. So clearly, when we look at this whole issue of uh, the pandemic has been certainly a period of unprecedented global uncertainty. And irrespective of where we are, this is one disaster that has affected all humankind in more ways than one. So whether it is government administrations, sometimes at the forefront, primarily healthcare providers, to support the work that is done by governments. There are various frontline service providers, including the people who sell us our groceries and our vegetables every day, taking risks by doing so, as well as people like us who are humanitarian agencies trying to fill spaces that the government is unable to fill, and and being part of responses to disasters as and when they happen. Like over the years, there have been several lessons that many of us have learned in dealing with disasters. And an organization like World Vision India, for instance, has been responding to disasters, almost all the big disasters in India. And we often like to think that we are among the first to come. We are obviously not involved in rescue because that's a very different ballgame altogether. But immediately after rescue, the whole area of response, recovery, and rehabilitation is something that we do. So trying to be among the first to be there when the disaster strikes, and among the last to leave after a certain period of rehabilitation, and uh, being able to support communities back into more sustainable living is something that many of us aim to do. And so whether it's floods, tsunamis, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, communal and civil strife, droughts, refugee crisis, and World Vision is involved in many of these, the impact of many of these across the world. Even a volcanic eruption, for instance, was something that we were dealing with in Philippines a few months back. Uh, but in some sense, the way COVID has impacted is that it is not restricted to one particular geographical area, and the speed of impact, the way it impacts people and communities in terms of impacting them directly through a health, or through infection, through a health crisis, or through the the fallout of a health crisis, whether it's loss of livelihoods because of lockdowns and other measures. It has been very unprecedented, as many of us have seen and experienced. Now, epidemics are not new for humanity, as I have said in the paper as well. Whether plagues, whether it's cholera, influenza, there have been several other endemic diseases. Some of them, people would argue whether what is a pandemic and what is an epidemic. But nevertheless, whether it's HIV, AIDS, SARS, swine flu, Ebola, all these in the last 2 decades the world has faced and has dealt with. But like I said again, the influence of many of these are often subnational or local, sometimes national, sometimes regional, but still relatively, in comparison with what we are seeing today, they always have affected smaller populations and in more limited geographical settings, or have otherwise been slower in their onset or progress. The most comparable pandemic for COVID-19 kind of is the Spanish flu, which ravaged the world towards the end of World War I, and 1918, 1919 was when it happened. Some believe it originated from the trenches, but many are, basically the people are unsure of where it really started. Most likely in Europe, certainly not in Spain, because Spain was not part of the wars, and Spain did tend to, however, report these cases more, and that's why it tended to get labeled as a Spanish flu. But what was again interesting is that at that point in time, and it's an important lesson for us as we look at it. There were 500 million people worldwide who had got infected by it, and that was at that point in time 1/3 of the world's population. And there are estimates of death which range from 20 million to 50 million. Even in India, there were a few million who died during that period, and that was again at a time when there were no effective drugs or vaccines to treat the flu. Citizens were ordered to wear masks. Schools, theaters, businesses were closed, and a lot of people died, and you had to deal with disposal of dead bodies, the cremation and burial arrangements, and it was all very makeshift at that point in time. So like I said, the way in which, if we were to look at something comparable, is therefore in many sense beyond most of people. It's really beyond living history for us, and therefore it's important for us to understand that in some sense this very unprecedented nature requires us to think afresh on our feet, whether it is in terms of doctors and healthcare professionals, whether it's in terms of governments, whether it's in terms of people in the area of development. And we have to really think afresh and find innovative ways of dealing with it. And that's a struggle that we are seeing in terms of how countries struggle with the way they are handling it. Some countries probably handling it better than the others, and some countries really reeling under its impact. So it may be helpful in one sense also then to look at it biblically whenever there are events, because the Bible is much older than us. It is the word of the Creator who created the world, and has seen it through these many years, that and decades and millennia that we have lived in. And I just thought that one lens through which you can look at scripture, and that Raja alluded in the introduction, is to look at it through the passage of the teaching on God's kingdom, and more so because of the questions that are asked about, are these signs of the end times? Is it a judgment on people? And look at it from the point of view of, is it to be seen more from the point of view of biblical eschatology, or a larger kingdom view we need to have for it? Is the question that kind of came into my mind. We all know clearly that the declaration of God's kingdom, Jesus announced it. In one sense, he declared it himself when he read the scroll from Isaiah 61, called the Nazareth Manifesto by many later, uh, about a new reign, a new way of understanding God's reign in human lives. And whether it was Jesus' crucifixion, his resurrection, his ascension, the coming of God's Holy Spirit in power on the day of Pentecost, followed by signs and wonders of a kind that had never been seen before in such a large way, and the growth of the church, particularly in the initial period, in an extremely hostile environment. Uh, we know clearly today, when we look at the whole idea of God's kingdom, as in one sense being embodied in the church, as being part of really God's reign in human lives, as it needs to be reflected through the life of the church and God's community, God's household, God's people, reflecting therefore the principles of the kingdom. And so that is something that I thought would be helpful for us in looking at the crisis itself. Now, these discourses of Jesus, and this was where the particular passages that I chose, primarily Matthew 24 and 25, these were on the Mountain of Olives, which was a Sabbath walk, as it says, from Jerusalem. And this was post Jesus' triumphant coming and arrival into Jerusalem, where he was hailed as the king. Uh, and it was, in that intervening period between what one would call Palm Sunday and the period of Jesus' trial, the Maundy Thursday and the Good Friday events, as it were. And some of these conversations, as he began, and we find them in the earlier chapters, in the preceding chapters, were questions on different aspects of life in the kingdom, which really come up in the questions that were asked to him and in the answers that he gave. And these were, again, as we remember, and as the biblical writers very faithfully record, that these Jesus always taught and he spoke in ways that had never been heard before. So in some sense, it was an understanding of God's rule and God's reign never before the world had ever seen, heard, or understood. And clearly, for the Jews, one of the most, one of the external signs of what was wondrous for them was the temple, which stood on, literally on fairly high ground. And it says that it is only 200 feet lower than the highest point of the Mount of Olives. It is to say that, look, at the end of it, look at these grand buildings, this grand structure. And Jesus referred to it and he said that, look, this is going to be razed to the ground. Not even one stone would be left on top of the other. I mean, mentioning clearly that the whole thing would be flattened. And so what happens is that several times when one therefore look at this, there is clearly, I mean, the focus on those questions that were asked by the disciples. And questions that they asked were, when will this happen? What will be the signs of your coming and of the end of the age? And it is there that Jesus is talking about it. And then, so these have been in many ways the subject of often messages, sermons by Christians, across the ages, and clearly, in terms of, again, a way in which no one had heard before. So a voice globally, Billy Graham, for instance, talked a lot about it, and he talked a lot about the end times, and talked a lot about the end days and the imminent return of Jesus. Often in some of his messages, he cites these signs, and he said that, look, it's very close, it's very imminent. All these are happening simultaneously. So clearly that was very much there. Uh, so that brings me to the core of what I'm talking about, and I'm looking about it in three broad heads. What is the context for God's kingdom, and particularly viewed with the whole eschatological lens? What is the life in the kingdom? Therefore, when we are seeing it almost at the whole situation eschatologically. And what is judgment in the kingdom? It's very that the end of eschatology is really whole issue of judgment which will come. And I know that I don't want to get into the discussion on the interpretations on biblical eschatology at this point. But again, like I said, as a practitioner, how do I see it? How does one bring a sense of realism to how we should respond and how we should be? Uh, so the context for the kingdom, it seems that for many people, because we tend to see the second coming as imminent, there is often very little interest in the current events of the day. And sometimes there is this, again, for some Christians, there is this, I would think, a very unhealthy focus and a very unbalanced focus sometimes only in this end times and trying to figure out when Jesus will come and things like that. And we have seen many people make these predictions being wrong, saying it will happen in their lifetime. But the whole point is, I don't think Jesus' own uh, response and conversation, he wanted his church, he wanted his disciples to really speculate about it. He was more concerned about how they would live. And that is why, whether even when we read the writings of the apostles, whether it is Paul to Thessalonica, in Thessalonians, Titus, and of course there are references in different places, whether it's Peter, James, John. Uh, there is clearly, I would think that the church expected more imminent, a much closer return of the Lord Jesus. Whether any of them thought that the church would be at the end of 2,000 years still waiting, I mean, is something that we will never clearly know. But clearly, what they also did tell, and this comes out in both Paul and Peter's letters, that ultimately, like, look, the Lord will return, but we don't know. The day of the Lord would be like a thief in the night, and how long would it take? We really don't know. But because the Lord is going to return, because the Lord is going to come, the focus has always been for them, how then should we live? And how should we how should we react, and how should we engage, and how should we be involved as a community, as a group? How should we forge relationships among each other? How should we focus on in terms of our own spirituality? What are the issues that we need to look at? So while this is seen as something that will certainly happen, the point is that since we don't know, we at least focus on the things that we know and are much clearer. And actually, Jesus himself does not immediately reply to that when question. And you would find that gets seemed to be replied at a later stage in the conversation. But he talked about certain things that would happen. He talked about the fact that the church would go through persecution, and we find that they indeed did. They was beheading, crucifixion, being thrown to wild animals in that very generation. So it is not that it happened just before he came back. And in less than 4 decades, the temple, what he talked about, was actually destroyed. It was razed to the ground after a period of almost 5 years when the Jews had rebelled against the Roman overlords. There were people who were sent to quell the rebellion, not particularly successful. And finally, the General Titus, I think it was under the Emperor Vespasian, who ultimately destroyed. He attacked, succeeded, destroyed, and razed it to the ground. And there was utter cruelty in the way they handled the Jews, because the Romans couldn't stand the stiff and fierce rebellion of the Jews during that period. Wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes, famines, and pestilences. And while I pointed out that this word is specifically mentioned in the KJV, it's absent in some of the more newer translations, but clearly it is there. The word pestilence comes in Luke. So these are clearly parallel passages referring perhaps to same conversations or similar conversations around that time. But clearly there was this whole idea about pestilences, and therefore outbreaks of plagues and epidemics would certainly at in a very intense manner during that period. And so whenever something like this happens, and I'm sure these were questions that happened, even these questions were asked even when the Spanish flu had been there, or whether it was the Black Death was affected Europe, or whether there were different plagues and illnesses, always this question would be asked. I mean, is it the end times? Is it that the Lord's coming is near? And is it a judgment for our life? And there have been some very gruesome images of people running away, for instance, that whole that whole reference to people fleeing and running away from cities and running to the mountains. I mean, and we know that in our own lifetime, when cities get bombed and how people flee, and that image of that Napalm girl, Kim Phuc, running down a road with severe burns on her back is something that gripped the whole imagination of the world at that particular point in time. Equally for us now in India, watching these images, and I don't think there has been a single person in this country who has not been affected by it. Seeing these migrant laborers trudging through highways in hot summer, carrying possessions on their heads, often with very little children, and these are temperatures, in the mid 30s, close to 40s, maybe in some cases even over that. And so that is that is something that is there. It is happening even today. And so then people will ask this question, hey, is this really happening? you know so how would one describe these uncertain times of COVID? I mean, one of the facts that we see is that even states with reasonably good health systems are struggling to contain the pandemic. We are finding that people with places with high population densities, it started for instance in the slums in Mumbai, in Dharavi. Thankfully that has moved away from Dharavi as the as one of the hotspots. But clearly, wherever there are high population densities and the inability to enforce or to practice distancing, physical distancing from each other, simply because people are living in very crowded conditions. And then the challenges that we have for our health system, we are actually seeing no matter what we do, the numbers continue to keep rising. And that the enemy is so invisible, we don't really can't see the enemy. All that we know is that the effects of the enemy come up, and and there are debates on whether we are testing enough, we are testing too little, are we reporting all the deaths? I mean, these questions are coming, but possibly what do we need to do and how do we need to deal with it is something that is grappling the is challenging the minds of policymakers at this particular point. And I mean, the only hope is that a certain degree of herd resistance, and that is how previous pandemics were saw what happened. A certain amount of herd resistance in the population would result in a certain amount of resistance being created, and then the incidence of the illness will come down. There will be sometimes recurrences in some places, and then over a period of time it will taper out, perhaps to have a new virus come later. But the point is that yes, we'd be very glad if our mortality rates, we escape the kind of higher mortality rates we are seeing in Western nations. Economic consequences, this has been talked about a lot. They have been very severe. Several sectors of the economy are going to be in trouble. The millions of economic migrants who have gone without jobs. I mean, we have done ourselves surveys and studies of this for our population, and we see that uh, there are only 4% in our communities of people who say that they have not really been affected by it. 60 to 70% across the South Asia region have had severe problems. So we actually have data to show how the lockdowns, while even people not suffering from the pandemic or the health crisis directly, have been so badly impacted by its effects, which is the effect of lockdown. So clearly the health crisis has now or will move again to an economic crisis. So even as we are struggling with the challenges of the health crisis, the economic crisis is already upon us. And sometimes there are other crises which will occur together. For instance, very intense heavy rains we saw at some point in time. Say in the Philippines, there was a worry about a typhoon. In India, we saw the cyclone Amphan hit us. In the Solomon Islands and Vanuatu, we had the tropical cyclone Harold, which hit the countries at that point in time. Thankfully, these countries are not badly hit by the crisis. And these can be very devastating to the population. And so the question about, are these the birth pangs or are these just the signs of the pregnancy, is something that can that can occupy our minds as we go along. And trying to answer that question can engage us, and particularly sessions and seminar like this, it seems to be quite a hot topic for discussion. But to my mind, if you look at how Jesus has asserted his generation would look at these things, the fact is that these would always be the context of God's kingdom. If you look at the period of church history, we'll find that in varying intensity, we have faced all the various issues and challenges that Jesus has talked about. And therefore, to my mind, trying to answer this question very comprehensively and completely, to my mind, is perhaps what's. I mean, I shouldn't say uncharitably, but clearly it's a fool's errand. second aspect, therefore, is life in the kingdom. Since we are having this, and we know that this is going to be the state of the world till Jesus comes, uh, perhaps it will be very intense at one point before the Lord returns, where you will have multiple disasters occurring simultaneously and in ways that we have never known and imagined. All that maybe, all that will happen at some point obviously in the future. But how then should we live? And then when he therefore talked about living, I think he talked about our living in a particular way. And I just look at some of those examples that he gave. It seems that what he says is, don't worry about the when so much, try and discover it, but think of how you will live during this period. And that is really important. Of course, the gospel, he did mention that the gospel would be preached to all nations who have died and not heard, and we will, and we can get into this whole series of unanswerable questions and occupying delivery. God is telling us that it is unexpected, it is announced, unannounced. It will be like a thief who breaks into the house in the night. Readiness. Be perpetually vigilant for his coming. So it is almost as if you live expecting that Jesus will come tonight, but being prepared for the fact that he may not come for several millennia. And that probably is an attitude that Jesus was asking the church to reflect. And then he gives the example of a wise and faithful servant who served diligently even when the master was not there. And he says that there are two kinds of them. One of them will exploit the situation because the master is not there. The other will continue to be faithful. And he says, you be like the faithful person. Or the whole idea of being ready, the 10 bridesmaids waiting for the bridegroom to arrive for the wedding banquet, or the people given the bags of gold to use. So a sense of urgency, watchfulness, preparedness as we wait for his coming, which may be imminent, but really rendering diligent and faithful service. In again, because of my own management background, I would say that look, it looks like it's a combination of the strategic and the tactical, both short term and long term. And at the end of the period of waiting, God's people will face the judgment. And again, very significant that these parables are placed just after the description of the eschatological events. And I think that it is probably, in some sense, Jesus said this deliberately. He says, yes, all these things will happen. You asked me that question about the end of the age, and I can say that there will be all these terrible events happen, and you have to prepare for it, you have to live for it. But remember, how is your life going to be, knowing that this will happen? And sometimes and I've in the note actually talked about a very critical assessment of Billy Graham's life by Matthew Sutton, where he ultimately talked about how this whole focus on the sometimes the end times probably led Billy Graham himself, I mean, someone such a respected leader at that, and it might seem a fairly extreme and very uncharitable assessment, saying that look, because of all that, real change, real social transformation was probably ignored, including the fact that while his rallies were desegregated, that was very clear. He did not have any segregation practice, but while he had very overt support to the whole movement initially, for rights of African Americans. The support then became far less overt, and it dwindled over a period of time. Even on issues like, for instance, climate change, where there were more direct assertions in later editions of his books, it came away. So this is something we need to be mindful of and realize that as evangelicals, and which many of us are, we are part of this community. We need to be mindful of this criticism and therefore live accordingly. And for engaging with the state, I mean, there's always this whole disbelief that the state can do anything good. They are ultimately government. They're outside of the church. Why should we work with government? But well, theologically, we also know that governments are there because God places them there. Sometimes evil governments, cruel governments, and it is in that time that God has used. He has used tyrants like Cyrus. He's used people like Nebuchadnezzar, I mean, ultimately to work his purposes. So governments have a role and place, and God is a God above these governments. And therefore, I think that there is clearly a need for us to work with them, and we need an emergency response. And that is why, as World Vision, we work very closely with government in the emergency response. We're part of the consultations with government. We try and help influence policy, not necessarily by making the government look bad, but by trying to persuade that, look, this is a better way to do things. Because for us, child well-being is important. So talking about issues of child well-being, writing to the Prime Minister, writing to ministers, having conversations in states, chief ministers, other ministers, just telling telling them that, look, mind these issues, be sensitive about these issues, is something that we need to continue to do. You know, and I would think that as individuals as well as Christian community, we continue to support, complement these efforts, support government, support civil society organizations. And I must say that this is one crisis, and again, where people have seen the church, and not just the church, many faith groups come together and respond. Particularly, the images were so disturbing that you are finding people willing to go on the streets, organizing cooked food, dry ration packs, and doing work in a various in a multiple set of ways, uh, uh, that 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 actually call for response. That's one part of it, but there are also equally a lot of people who have not really bothered about it. And that is something that is what I'm talking about in the next part. And the whole question is, can we just let this go by and do nothing about it, is a question that we would need to ask. And there are many who are not able to go because they themselves are health risks. Anyone who's over the age of 60, for instance, clearly is a health risk. And for them to be going out and doing things may not be the best thing to do. But it's like the old slogan that the IEM used to have: if you can go, if you can't send. Is something that, well, is something that we could remember at this time. And I'm not trying to fundraise for World Vision at this point. And the last part of this is judgment in the kingdom. And then and again, I tread very carefully here when I look at the whole area of judgment. And I think that we need to look at this again very, very seriously, because this ultimately is Jesus' words, and he's talking about the coming judgment. There's a sorting out of people into sheep and goats. Again, very reminiscent of his words in the Sermon on the Mount, where there is a distinction made between people doing his will and otherwise. And then we ask the question, what does he want from us? And yes, there are answers which have already been given. The prophet Micah says this clearly: to act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly. And Jesus himself, when he read out his statement in his Nazareth declaration, he's talking about what he wants to do, and what is he come here for. And that same passage that he read actually states the reason for all this: for I, the Lord, love justice, I hate robbery, I hate wrongdoing. He talks about how acts of devotion and fasting that he requires from us, Isaiah 58, are to loosen the chains of injustice, untie the cords of the yoke, set the oppressed free, share food with the hungry, clothe the naked, provide shelter, and generously give. So as the church deals with series of events like this, may not be as intense as in the time as the birth pangs, there's clearly a need for us to be strategically as well as tactically involved in some of this. Sometimes we have convenient interpretations which will say that the judgment is only for people outside the church in the way they relate to either the church or to the Jewish people. So there are a couple of interpretations of this kind which have been there, as if it is to absolve the church from its responsibilities to be agents of God's justice, and to be particularly kind and solicitous about the needs of the poor, the weak, the excluded, the vulnerable. Obviously, for me, and I call it an inconvenient truth, is that God cannot expect a standard for the rest of the world which is higher than a standard that he expects from us. I mean, our standard from us will be so much more higher. I'm also equally mindful that, look, we have to understand this passage and see it in the and cannot formulate a judgment for doctrine for judgment solely on the basis of this passage. But we need to take this in mind. I mean, knowing that, yes, of course, God's great plan of salvation, the doctrine of grace are there, but God's assessment of the church, God's assessment of each of us, will certainly consider how well we have sought to uphold his concerns, his standards of justice, his standards of compassion in caring for the poor, in caring for the hungry. I really never really understood how significant giving a glass of water could be till I saw those images, and it really hit me, this passage and these words of Jesus, as to how precious a glass of water would be for that migrant walking in that hot midday sun with her children, with her husband, carrying heavy burdens on their heads, some often not even wearing slippers on their feet. And then it's good for us, therefore, when we look at this, to look at our own, how we have spent the lockdown. Have we spent it, yes, wisely and well? But has it been only with a measure of self-interest, or at one extreme end, hedonism? And I think that is where, so we talked about a bewildering array of spiritual topics are also available. We can see it and we can occupy our time, and for the middle class, it's a great time of being at home, forced rest. And many of us will say that we are bonding with our families as never before. But I think that's where the message of God is very clear through the prophet Amos. You lie on beds inlaid with ivy. You dine on choice lambs and fattened calves, and we all have so many photographs on Facebook of all the tasty dishes that we are cooking. Uh, Strum away on your harps like David, and you improvise on musical instruments. And we've improvised to have virtual choirs now. You drink wine by the bowlful. But he says, look, if you're not concerned about it, you will be among the first to go into exile. So in the context where COVID will continue to play havoc, and it's not going away immediately, ICMR's projection actually shows that by the time we see a peak, it will probably be November. So for the next 1 or 2 years, our own strategy, we are correcting clearly to see the impact in the first year, probably another 6 months more. So clearly this is bound to be there. And I think that we would, when we face our Lord, the day of judgment, the Lord would ask us, what did you do during COVID? And I think, can we, like many others in the early church history, be the ones who say that, look, we took risks, we went out, we supported, we funded, we did all that we can to take care of the poor. I think in some sense it's a once in a lifetime challenge. It's happened after close to 100 years, something as widespread and unprecedented as this. And the question is, will we just pass it by, spectating, commenting, or would we be actively engaged? And that's a challenge for us. That's a challenge for the church. Thank you.
Thanks, Cherian. It was really a very powerful presentation of what you have written in the paper, and those who had the opportunity to go through your paper, I'm sure it would generate quite a number of questions that people would have been posting to Satish. So before, we have about 15 minutes for question answer, but as you formulate your own questions and post them on the chat box, I would request Dr. Idicheria Chan Nainan, who is also present with us in this meeting. And incidentally, he also wrote a paper which was published in our Tracy newsletter last month as part of the COVID reflection from a missional perspective. So to start off this conversation, may I request Dr. Nainan to share very briefly some thoughts on what Satish has shared, Cherian has shared, and just responding to those issues that he has raised.
If I were close by to Cherian, I would have just gone and given him a hug to say and clap aloud and encourage you to give him a standing ovation for the wonderful reflections. It's very difficult to disagree with what Cherian has said, because I fully endorse what he has said. And even in my family prayers yesterday, we were discussing Matthew 24 and 25, and how Cherian responded about the punchline being how to live and embody and witness the kingdom. I fully endorse that. And the only concern I have is Cherian has correctly helped us to not to be judgmental, not to be unconcerned, thinking that the Lord is coming tomorrow. Therefore, hallelujah, my deliverance is just around the corner. So let the pagans perish. No. This is the time to intervene and embody the king and the kingdom. That challenge was given very, very carefully, very, very loudly, clearly. Thank you. I feel hungry every day. And then I read about hunger deaths. There is some response, not a very programmed response. But when we hear of a famine, we usually arrange, World Vision arranges organized response. I think this is calling us to, this is an alarm signal. The alarm signal to embody the kingdom, as Cherian said, but I as a believer, I think, should also listen here an alarm, because things are not normal. Some people may say that this is the principle of natural selection at work. Somebody else will say that, some kind of Malthusian theory is at work, or the earth, Mother Earth, is shedding off its extra weight. But as a Christian, I would call the church to be attentive, because we are today messing up with most trivial matters rather than engaging in the kingdom's work. And I'm sorry, I am ashamed to say this. The church is far from being the light at this point. Rather than being the good Samaritan, as Syrian has asked us to, suggested to us, I think we are protecting ourselves for fear of being infected or being contaminated. So here is an alarm call, to be engaged, to embody the kingdom, but also for the church to listen. For the church to be attentive, to listen, and to therefore be prepared, because we don't know when the Lord is coming. Absolutely, that's what keeps us going. That while we serve Him and witness the presence of the kingdom, we are also called to tiptoe, wait, stretching our necks forward, straining our toes and our necks, peeping for the imminent coming. So I think that side should not be blurred. While I fully clap for what Cherian said, let's see this as an opportunity to show there is a caring God, a loving God, a merciful God, a God who wants His children to risk their lives to serve those who are hurting today. Thank you, Cherian. I have learned much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Idich, for sharing your thoughts. And it's really, I think what you have highlighted from his presentation is church, as many of all of us are, I think, had become in a sense of a paralysis, or what we call a paralyzed because of the shock of the impact. But Cherian has tried and encouraged us to is rather than take a victim complex, like we are all victims of this pandemic, but how do we actively engage? I think that is what he has emphasized. And Dr. Edie, as you were saying, I was remembering, I think it was Martin Luther who said, if Christ was coming tomorrow, I will be planting today. So I think that is the whole perspective that even the reformers have given to us, not waiting for, and because of that, in a sense of just waiting in a waiting room, right? Not doing, but to be actively engaged in the works of the kingdom. I think that is the perspective that Cherian brought out. And I'm told that there have not been questions in the chat box. If some of you who are waiting to ask questions directly, may I give you this opportunity to unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can raise your hand in the box. Raise your hand, and then Satish will let you the order in which you can ask the question. So if anybody has a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Welcome, Jamila. Satish, do you see anybody raising hand?
No, I just saw Jamila Didi's hand, that's it. But we also have Finney Jacob from USA. Thank you for joining. What are your thoughts sitting from across out of the country right now and viewing India? Yeah. You need to unmute yourself.
Oh, you really have put me in a spot. I really, I was in a listening mode. Thank you so much, Cherian, and also Dr. Edie for your thoughts. I'm learning a lot. I've also been, as you all have been, I've been also reflecting on what all this means in a very self-critical manner, because I, my own criticism about my background and my gathered theology is that I go with a microscope where I should actually be going with my eye open. I go into this analytical mode where it is not warranted, and instead missing the loud and clear messages right around me. That's my first impression about this whole episode. Because when Jesus himself challenges his people, how can you miss the signs of the times which are so clear and evident? Because you are always going with this microscope into these eschatological questions. So that has been my general observation about the whole thing. If we are looking for eschatological answers now, we might be missing the loud, clear signals that are coming to us from the minor prophets, from the prophets who spoke about the need to address these questions at every level. Now, the point in my view is that I am looking at the lessons for Modi and for Trump and for Brazil and for Russia. I'm not looking for, the problem is I'm not looking for what this actually is calling me out. But I really liked Sherian when he focused on this question of what does God require of you? Micah, what is he requiring of you? And that is the question I think God is asking at every level, at a believer's level, at the church leadership level, at the national leadership level. And those questions can all have different answers, like what you see in the case of John the Baptist being asked about what do we do? And he had an answer for the soldiers, an answer for the professionals, he had an answer for Herod. He had at different levels it works. We will be judged on the question of how we answer the question that is posed to us. I would end there.
Thank you so much. I'd like Cherian Bhaiya to also, if necessary, whenever he feels like to respond, but otherwise, Raj Bhaiya, there are questions.
So we have some questions. So I would like to share a question with Cherian that you would like to respond. It is from Salathiel Nalli, and he asks, what do you say about the response of the church in India for COVID-19? Is it adequate or there is much more scope to respond? Cherian.
Yeah, I mean, I realize that I'm part now of the social sciences, which Brother Salathiel also is part of. And I remember with Salathiel, we had an interesting conversation sometime many years ago when we probably looked at globalization from different lenses. And we had a very interesting conversation then. See, I really don't, I mean, again, because of my own background and training, I would, before I make a statement of this kind, I would really like to have a certain degree of evidence. And I don't think anyone has the evidence to show how much the church has provided or not. And the evidence can only be garnered through scientific study. We have not done that. Maybe the church should be doing that and figuring out how responses have been. Maybe we can selectively have a sample, even a rapid assessment of various churches in various cities to figure out what has been done. I mean, that would be a good analysis to have for us to even have a credible answer to that question. But having said that, my experience is really a little more limited to, in some ways, remotely monitoring World Vision Zone response across different places. And the answer that I would have is that there are several churches which have responded. We are working with some churches in some places actively. In Calcutta, for instance, with the Assemblies of God Church, there's a very active program of feeding. But then Assemblies of God in Calcutta has some very, very active engagements in any case, whether in terms of running hospitals, in terms of other acts of relief, and so there would be several instances. I know even today evening there is a conversation with one of the church leaders from the Gateway Ministries, for instance, talking about the challenge of the urban situation particularly and how we need to respond to it. I know as the church that I am part of, Marthoma Church, has been actively engaged in responding to it. There are different organizations which have been responding differently, but I still think that for something of this scale, how much is enough? I mean, I would think it is never really enough. For the size and scale that we have for our country, how much really is enough? How much would be enough? And I think this is a question each of us has to ask. Each church has to ask itself: Are we engaging enough? My own, again, experience of living and serving in the Christian community over many years is that we're not all engaged. We're not as much engaged as we ought to be. Again, the idea is not to make anyone feel guilty, but clearly the challenge for us is how can we be more and more engaged. So I really think there is no limit to it, because we talked about famine. There is always a low degree famine that India has. I mean, despite its millions of tons, 150 million tons of surplus food grains, which reflects in malnutrition in children. The average malnutrition in India, even before COVID, was done in 2015 as part of the National Family Health Survey. It had come down from a level of about 38% to 33% in terms of just weight. And stunting, which is a more long-term chronic measure of malnutrition, had come down by 10 percentage points. But it is still as high as 38% in this country. And believe me, malnutrition levels are going to change after the crisis. So, and again, India is characterized by very high levels of inequality. There have been a lot of Oxfam report studies or UBS report studies, which again talk of this very big divide. And the Gini coefficient, which is a good reflection of shows India as to be one of the most unequal countries in the world. So it is unimaginable that we should be having this chronic low-grade starvation. There are, of course, instances sometimes when you hear in Palghar, for instance, 80 tribal children died, but that's thankfully rare. And we don't have the eras of the old Bengal famine and others that we had even in the last century. But having said that, even to be chronically undernourished, to be chronically in a state of starvation, to my mind, in a country like India where we have the resources, is something where the church must ask these questions. Why is it happening? And therefore the role of the church to be the salt and to show the way and be the light is to my mind really very important. And so
thanks, Sharon. We have a couple of other questions, so yeah. I would like to share those with you. So because of limitation of time, maybe I will read a few and you can perhaps respond together. So one is by James Michael. He asks, what Christian faith can teach us in this season of the coronavirus? So I think you have reflected to that. But then there is another question by Shibu Mani. He says, is there a frustration among government globally? Should we expect a frustration in the days to come if it is going to be longer time? And what could be the preparedness we can have? So it's frustration among the government. Then one more. The network of Indian churches coming together for migrant relief is noteworthy and commendable. Comment. And last, clearly COVID has exposed several system failures. How can at least, this is from Sarah and Sushil, how can at least now work to highlight those issues and work on them that were left unaddressed? For example, urban migrant does not come under any of the governance structure and left out of any services or welfare activities provided by local governments. So this is Joshi D. So there are a lot of questions coming, but I would just, government failure and our own fault lines being exposed and the preparedness of the government, frustration, these aspects.
Yeah, I think this is clearly criticisms that have been levied. There have been a lot of conversations on this, that the government was kind of caught napping, and this happened in the initial months. I know our own health sector colleagues would say that despite advice from WHO, we are not seeing that scale. I think at one level, people did not take it seriously enough. And that is not only India's problem, that has been problems of many governments around the world. But having said that, we also need to understand that dealing with the issues of 1.35 billion is always going to be challenging. The sad part is that no one was able to foresee the problems of the migrants. And there have been studies in 2015 which showed that there were at least 80 million migrants. I've seen numbers now being talked about of 100 million. A lot of the migration is
closer home, but even if there are 20-30 million people who have had to travel across states, and they are the ones who are walking these 500 and 1,000 kilometers, this is a problem. Many of them come for short periods, so they don't have any permanent residence in the city, and with urban housing being what it is in many large cities, they live in slums, they live in temporary accommodation, they don't have documents, so even for them to be able to access, and I must say that over the years, our ability to provide for people through in terms of food security through the public distribution system has improved. It varies from state to state, but it's certainly there. When states like Tamil Nadu, for instance, have had extremely good schemes, through the Amma canteens and others, which people like with other states have also replicated and picked up. So I think there has been an increasing focus on all this, and I don't think the church should be seen as visibly, in one sense, trying to demoralize. I mean, any criticism that is destructive, I think at this particular point in time is not helpful. Can we be constructive? Can we give suggestions? And can we demonstrate? I think that can be an approach that the church can take. And I thought one very good initiative which was taken by CMAI was actually reaching out and writing to the PM's office and saying, look, we are a group of Christian hospitals. This is what we can do. And they were invited to a conversation with the PM. And since then, several of the hospitals have been also in readiness and been engaged in their own states. So I would think this reaching out, despite sometimes the natural distrust of a government which embodies the kind of values that it has, both religious as well as social. I think we probably just need to work, and we need to overcome that and work boldly without being afraid of the consequences. So that's one of the things. What Christian faith can teach us, I would think that apart from what I've said, I think sometimes there is also a little bit of fear that we have. And I find that this fear also is based on a lot of self-interest. What if I die? What if my family suffers? I mean, we are the ones who talk about eternal security, and particularly among the evangelicals, this kind of a fear of death should not be there, because anyway, we have eternal security in heaven. So death would simply mean going to the Lord. So why should we be afraid? So that sense of fear is what always sometimes surprises me. It baffles me. I find that bewildering. System failures, yes. I think though that governments are making, whether there will be fatigue, yeah, I think there is. Obviously, if you're going to see it continue for several months, there would be those. The governments are going to be fatigued. Government officials are all human like us. People, there will be tiredness which comes in, which is why I think sometimes this very intense lockdown as a strategy is not what would work. Perhaps in hindsight, if you look at what countries like Sweden probably did, they said, look, we'll go on, we'll take the risk, we'll go on, we'll just educate people and accept the fact that, look, there is going to, and I probably put that in the paper as well, there will be a few thousand who die, whether it will be 20,000, 50,000, I don't know. The UK initially said that, look, even if 20,000 die, we'd be happy. I mean, that's a lower number. Since then, the numbers in the UK have been much more than the 20,000. But I think we just need to be aware. Look back at history. Yes, there is going to be mortality. There is going to be infection. No matter what we do, no matter how we, we will never find the system perfect. One might point to countries like Hong Kong or to countries like Taiwan, where they have very low mortality rates, or countries like Singapore. But there again, the whole the infection has been in relatively fewer pockets, and they were able to, even with the limited work that they did, with the shutdown that they were able to contain the viruses quite well. But ours is a large country, and there's so much of in-country migration which will happen. So I don't see it going down. It's going to go up. We prepare for it going up. We need to remember that there will be mortality, and we just need to deal with that with compassion and care. And I would therefore see that there's a need for a lot of realism and pragmatism in the way we deal with it. But like I said, always laced with kindness and compassion in the way we deal with it.
Thanks, Cherian. Though I would like to share that our time is up. We had said we'll finish by 7:30. So those who would like to sign off, you can. But there are a couple of other questions. So we would like to use this opportunity to share those questions also. So if you are able to hang on, that will be good. So I will just pose some of the other questions which have come. Can we say, this is from Purnami from JNU, can we say that COVID is symbolic of the whole world groaning in the pains of childbirth? If you can throw some light on COVID vis-a-vis Roman 8:23, I would be grateful. Then what shall be a roadmap for longer plan for preparation for future epidemics like this. This is from Raju from Hyderabad. Then Nitesh is asked one question. If we look back to history, Christian organizations have always been the top contributors during any calamity compared to any other religious organization. And lastly, NDTV and World Vision had partnered to extend support to children during this COVID period. Can we have some information on the response? This is from Amrit.
Okay. Yeah. So when it comes to the question that Purnami raised, I mean, I just think that perhaps our New Testament scholar on the group would probably be the best person to answer that question. But having said that, my tentative explanation had been that probably we are not seeing the birth pangs now, and otherwise there would have been similar birth pangs that happened at different points in time. If we were present during the Black Death, the plague which wiped out such a large part of countries in Europe, would we be saying the same, asking the same question? And I'm saying that I think we can be a little agnostic about whether we know the answer or not. But the fact is that creation will keep groaning. Creation wants its release, and that in its fullness will happen when the Lord returns. And that is the expectation. That is the hope for us as Christians. That's the hope for the church. So I would really think that even if I don't know the answer very clearly at this point, it doesn't matter. But whether it's just the signs of pregnancy or the birth pains in the required, of the required intensity, it shouldn't matter, because how I live during this entire period is what is really important. And our focus, to my mind, really ought to be on that. And that when such things happen, and they happen in different ways across, all the time, what is it that we can do? In terms of future epidemics, I think, yes, we have been seeing a certain degree of pandemics, so at least certainly epidemics affecting regions, whether it's SARS, whether it's swine flu. So there are protocols which are there for this, but the only difference is that here, and there were early warnings as well. Sometimes the warnings were not taken seriously enough. So no matter how good your protocols, if there is no executive action, you are bound to see problems, and then coming in and trying to recover it later becomes a challenge. So I think there is a role for us, particularly those of us who are in the health sector, to be in a timely way, be able to give warning, talk, articulate this, and I think that's something that we can learn from. It's not that it was not given. I would think that, though I know that WHO has been slammed a lot, it's not easy being in WHO. It's very easy, like I said, to stand on the sidelines, spectate and comment, but it's hard when you're out there. And yes, sometimes mistakes are made, but be generous. The third one was on Christians. What was exactly that?
The roadmap?
No, the roadmap for future epidemics I've finished, but the other question...
mostly in other epidemics, Christians have been at the forefront.
I don't know if we are... See, I would like to believe that Christians are giving a lot of money, and of course, the fact is that if you look at the West, and you see the West as, if you are assuming that equating the West with Christian nations, they have been among the big donors and very large in philanthropy. But again, I would rather try and base that answer on the basis of credible studies that we have. I don't know if we have enough studies on that. Our experience in India clearly shows that those who give to World Vision, for instance, 80% of them are actually not Christians. It's largely the Hindu community which actually gives. And Christians would probably give it to their own churches. Sometimes they would also give for other causes, so to say. But I think it is nice to think. But look, there are other communities which are active. I mean, the Sikhs, for instance, are known to give in different ways and different forms. The Jains are known to give. They're all actively involved in some form or the other, even during this crisis. We had an instance where in Delhi we actually worked with the RSS. Who no one would in the normal cause connect with, but for this particular cause, we were together in a couple of slum pockets in doing things together. So I think that is where I think that demonstration of who we are and what we are like and how we engage, reflecting Christ's values, is important. On the On what we did by raising money, I am not the right person to talk about it. The official spokesman for India is my colleague who's a national director for India. But I'm sure that if you have given, you will get an answer to how it is being used. All that I can say is that yes, this partnership has helped us to raise money, and this money is being poured into the response. World Vision India's initial plan was to spend at least $10 million and raise and spend $10 million. So we have a 75 crore plan for the COVID response, and some of it is from our existing resources being repurposed, and some of it is from the fresh resources being raised, and we are continuing to find the raising money. So what normally would happen is anyone who gives to World Vision will get a report on how the funds have been utilized. So please keep looking at the websites, and if you don't get it, please ask me. I'll certainly make sure that you know how your money is spent. That is something that we will do. I hope that answers the question.
For your responses, and I think all the questions that were posed, you have been able to respond. So thank you.
Just a minute.
I think Edie has a comment.
Edie has a comment, and then.
Okay.
Friends, this is not to challenge or contradict anyone. Just to let you know that I'm part of various mission agencies. To the best of my knowledge, our fellow Christians are walking the second mile. Jacob Samuel is here right in front of me. I know Isaac has done tremendously, gone out of the way in various kinds of active engagements, working with the government, healthcare programs, supporting, helping the medical checkup of migrant laborers, so much. I think Jacob Samuel should say that. May I say just for my local church? I have become more active and pastorally more involved in my local church because they have ministered to me by showing that in an hour like this, how much they can stretch, how much they have gone into the worst affected parts, to the villages, looked after migrant laborers, paid salaries of daily wage earners, and how even 540 families around the church locality which had registered for dry rations, we were able to supply them with 2 weeks survival kits. This is just a drop in the ocean. I'm so happy that so many groups that I know are actively engaged. This is nowhere near what World Vision or others are doing, but from within India with local resources, I know of people who have reduced their own personal expenditures just to care for the poor. I know of people who have paid 4 months' salaries to their domestic helps who could not come to work. So this is a place where I rejoice in what is happening at the local level and also what ISAF is doing. Sorry,
Thank you, Dr.
I just
Edie,
wanted to encourage you to say that while World Vision is doing something great and 70 crores, others are putting their also little might into the service.
So thank you, Dr. Edie, for sharing
Thank
that
you.
two dimes of the
I
widows
said this.
or the churches
I
at the
should
local
say.
level. They are still contributing those 2 dimes. And I'm sure, as Cherian pointed out, maybe as a social science analysis of those responses or interventions, that is something perhaps we lack. And it would be a good opportunity to do such a kind of study to see our engagement rather than just holding into those assumptions. But gathering those stories, as you're saying, at the local level, even at the district level, it would be an encouragement for the church as well. So I think that is something which we could take from here. And thank you once again, Cherian, for your...
One small comment. I think to begin with, just taking up on what Edie has said, I think if all of us would make sure that we pay our domestic helpers uninterrupted salaries for the time that they have not worked, I think that is a very, very tangible demonstration. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And so we would like to thank Cherian for this very, very insightful presentation, and especially tackling some of the real issues. So you really brought out a realistic grid to the whole problem, and then taking from this kind of a paralysis to an active engagement. And I think that is something which all of us have been challenged. And we hope that such conversation would continue as this kind of a period. As you said, it is a long haul that we are in, and how the church emerges out of this whole experience would be something perhaps what God is also looking forward to.